The alien warlord stood on a pulpit of crumbled stone, raised high over the desecrated ruins of St. Peter's Basilica. He wore the mitre of a pope, upside down, and in one hand held a Bible soaked in motor oil. He laughed into the camera, voice booming across every occupied city on Earth, as he tore out pages and fed them into a plasma torch. By morning, the entire warlord platoon was found dead in the same square, kneeling upright, hands folded in prayer, mouths stuffed with ash. Surveillance showed nothing. No attacker. No sound. Only the wind, and the church bells that hadn't rung in 2 decades. They called themselves the Kuru Dominion, conquerors of 9 systems, destroyers of 6 species, and redeemers of galactic purity. But when they reached Earth, they found resistance they hadn't planned for. Not in the form of armies or warships, those had long since been crushed, but in whispers, rituals, and relics buried too deep for scanners to detect. Their first months were easy. They erased cities with orbital beams and stomped on what was left. Humanity was broken and scattered. But the Kuru weren't content with winning, they needed to humiliate, to laugh at what they didn't understand. And Earth had something they didn't: belief. Their comedy broadcasts showed alien soldiers dancing inside mosques while pouring wine on prayer rugs. In temples, they replaced statues with holograms of their warlords posing shirtless. Churches were stripped, their pews used for firewood, their altars turned into urinals. On the surface, humans cowered and wept. But deep below, beneath Andy's stone and frostbitten silence, something stirred. It began with a whisper through old resistance lines. A name. A title, really? Not one carried by rank or fame, but one earned in blood and silence. The War Priest. Some dismissed it as folklore. Others remembered rumors from generations past. A program older than the Geneva Accords, built during the Cold War's theological arms race. A human weapon made of scripture, psionics, and biology altered by forbidden liturgic algorithms. Earth's last safeguard in case of spiritual war. The vault was hidden under what looked like a burned-out monastery. No power, no signals. The Kuru passed over it dozens of times, believing it irrelevant. But an old man, half-blind, draped in a shawl of stitched crosses, guided a group of young resistance fighters to the buried chamber. They expected weapons. What they found was a sealed coffin made of obsidian and iron, engraved with verses in Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, Sanskrit, and something else, older than known human language. Inside, perfectly preserved, lay a man in armor that looked more ceremonial than tactical. His skin was pale but unblemished. His hands clutched a blackened Bible fused with circuitry. When the final seal broke, he opened his eyes and asked calmly if the blasphemers still walked the earth. He said his name was Father Iosef. And he wept when he saw the state of the world. Elsewhere, Kuru Command intercepted resistance chatter about an anointed warrior. General Vexer, known for boiling prisoners alive and gifting their bones to his children, laughed at the reports. He personally approved an elite drop team, 36 armored troopers, each surgically enhanced, equipped with plasma rifles and stealth disruptors. They were sent to the Andes with one order: broadcast the priest's capture or death in real time. What happened instead was never broadcast. All communications from the drop team ceased 5 seconds after landing. Satellite footage showed the transport land. Then static. When a secondary team arrived 12 hours later, they found the first team's armor lined up in a perfect circle around a charred cross. No bodies. No tracks. Just a faint scent of incense and metal melted into the mountain stone. The Kuru blamed it on a local plasma mine or a stealth bomb. But fear had crept in. Soldiers began refusing orders to approach religious ruins. Officers were replaced. Dissenters were executed. Still, stories spread of a man who walked into occupied zones wearing robes of ash, quoting scripture while alien troops began hallucinating and seizing. Father Iosef did not hide. He moved from town to town, blessing ruins and reawakening the brokenhearted. But he was no gentle shepherd. In the ruins of Johannesburg, a Kuru slave processing facility was vaporized from the inside out. Survivors said the priest walked into the furnace chamber with nothing but a staff and a book. Flames turned blue. Screams echoed for hours. No one escaped. But from the ashes emerged hundreds of humans, untouched, eyes glowing with conviction. The Kuru High Council debated pulling back, fearing an unknown weapon, but Vexer insisted it was human superstition gone wild. He even filmed himself inside a mosque, laughing as he defiled the Quran by cooking bacon atop it. He spat on the mihrab and dared the priest to stop him. 3 days later, Vexer's flagship, the Omen of Dominion, vanished from orbit without a trace. Its wreckage was discovered in low Earth ocean orbit, torn in half. No escape pods. The crew's bones were found stacked into a staircase on a floating raft of holy symbols, crucifix, crescent, menorah, and more, none recognizable to the Kuru, but hauntingly arranged with symmetry they could not explain. Now whispers turned to prayers. Earth's survivors didn't just hope. They believed. And belief, against all reason, began to work. Weapons jammed mid-fire when aimed at ISF. Armored mech stumbled in his presence, as if gravity warped around him. Entire squadrons turned their guns on each other after hearing a single word broadcast in chant. He was not commanding armies. He was breaking the laws of physics using nothing but will and word. The Kuru tried deploying their Reaper-class war beasts, 12-legged apex predators that devoured cities. In Sao Paulo, one such beast opened its maw to consume a resistance outpost. ISF walked out alone and knelt. He did not speak. He prayed. The beast halted mid-charge, began convulsing, and fell with a howl. Its autopsy later revealed every nerve had been reversed. Its brain screamed for death from the inside. What terrified the Kuru wasn't just the deaths. It was that their soldiers began converting. Captured humans quoted verses that made no sense but sent aliens into seizures. The holy words didn't translate, but they triggered something deep in the alien mind, something ancient and repressed. Soon, Kuru warlords began issuing orders: eliminate all Earth religious texts. Burn every shrine. Seal every tomb. It didn't matter. Wherever they went, the priest had already passed through. And every time they laughed at faith, something horrific followed. But the worst was still to come. The priest had not yet entered their stronghold. He hadn't needed to. Not yet. But he had sent a warning, etched into the skin of a dead Kuru officer, pinned to the gates of the citadel. It read, "I remember Babel. And I am coming to rebuild it, one fallen god at a time." Ask ChatGPT. The streets of Jerusalem were silent as Father ISF walked through them, his robes trailing ash that seemed to fall from nowhere. The Kuru banners still fluttered from shattered windows, gaudy with their obsidian insignias and blood-red stars, but no soldiers came to challenge him. They had been here just hours before, according to locals. Yet when he arrived they vanished like smoke. Survivors watched from behind crumbling walls and broken gates, whispering to each other about the man who made demons flee. Children peeked around corners, some crying, some laughing with confusion. An old woman threw a handful of olive leaves at his feet and said nothing. He didn't stop walking. Beneath the old Temple Mount, in a bunker carved centuries ago, a small resistance cell tried to understand what had happened. 20 soldiers had stood guard at the gates. All dead. But not from battle. They were found sitting, heads bowed, eyes burned out but untouched by heat or blade. Medical scans showed no trauma. Just an impossible emptiness where thought once lived. One of the medics quit on the spot, muttering about prophecy and judgment. Another shot himself, leaving behind a single phrase carved into the wall: "He is not a man. He is the reckoning." ISF never called himself a savior. He did not preach in the streets. He listened. He knelt beside the wounded. He blessed the graves of the fallen, murmuring words in dead languages only few remembered. And wherever he went, things changed. Walls mended slightly. Air felt cleaner. Electronic devices flickered back to life if used for noble purpose. Resistance leaders began sending coded transmissions not through satellites, but by printing ancient scripture into watermarks and stitching verses into clothes. Faith had become a cipher. Belief was now strategy. The kuru grew desperate to reassert control. A battalion was dispatched to Cairo, where rumors claimed ISF would meet with surviving members of the Brotherhood of the Scribes. These were scholars once thought irrelevant, keepers of symbolic patterns from Earth's oldest texts, thought to have encoded energy frequencies into ink. The aliens scoffed at such tales. But after the last encounter with the priest, fear had made them cautious. The troops landed with full-spectrum dampeners, psionic blockers, and gravitic armor. Their commander, Goraven, ordered them to fire on any human within 10 meters of a religious structure. They never got the chance. Before they even reached the main plaza, a single bell rang, an ancient, rusted thing hanging from a mosque tower that had been bombed years ago. No human had touched it. Yet it swung. Slowly. Purposefully. Every kuru soldier stopped moving at once. Not by command. By paralysis. Some began muttering to themselves, uttering confessions in languages they didn't know. A few dropped their weapons and wept. Goraven screamed at them to stand, but his voice warped, turning into echoes of his own sins. Surveillance footage later showed the air thickening around them, like water. Then the footage cut to static. When a human scouting team arrived later, all 40 kuru soldiers were found alive. But changed. Their eyes glowed gold, and they spoke in riddles. One simply repeated the phrase, "The wheel has turned." Another pointed at the sun and called it his brother. They were no longer soldiers. They weren't even enemies. They were witnesses to something they couldn't describe. Earth commanders called it a passive psionic event. ISF called it mercy. In a different sector, far from the epicenters of these events, Kuru's scientists studied the anomalies with rising panic. Their tech couldn't explain what was happening. They detected no energy surge, no biochemical agents, no nano-infiltration. The data didn't match any weapon or known method of warfare. Yet the effect was undeniable. Units exposed to ISF or his influence experienced total psychological collapse or forced conversions. Some began carving strange symbols into their armor. One ship captain rerouted his cruiser into deep space after reporting a vision of a flaming throne. His ship was found drifting weeks later, all systems intact, but the crew had written entire books on the walls using blood. The Kuru High Mind convened an emergency protocol. It was time to stop treating this as a rebellion and instead categorize it as a theological insurgency. An ancient term was revived in their command network, heretica viralis. Spiritual infection. The idea that belief itself was now the weapon. And it was spreading. General Vexer's replacement, Admiral Slechtun, was less theatrical and more surgical. He authorized the deployment of a neutralizer team called the Eclipsed Choir, psionically blank assassins, genetically purged of imagination and spiritual perception. They were designed to be immune to all forms of ideology. They had no names, no thoughts outside of command input. The perfect counters to a weapon made of faith. The Eclipsed Choir dropped near the ruins of Vatican City, now repurposed as a Kuru communications relay. The mission was clear: if ISF was seen, eliminate him immediately using neuroscramblers. If not, destroy the relay and bait him out. But what they found was a city abandoned by aliens. Kuru had once occupied every corridor of the repurposed basilica. Now only bones remained. Perfectly cleaned. Aligned in pews as if awaiting Mass. As they advanced through the main nave, the choir members began receiving interference. Not from tech, but from dreams. One began to feel pain. Another remembered his mother's voice, though he'd never been born naturally. They slowed. Hesitated. One dropped to his knees. Then, from the altar, a figure emerged, not ISF, but a child holding a candle made of salt. He looked at them without fear and whispered 3 words, "You remember now." Half the choir dropped dead immediately. The other half tore off their helmets, screaming. Their blank minds had cracked open. Memory rushed in. Guilt. Fear. Hope. Everything their creators had tried to erase returned in a flood. And through that, they saw a man, not in flesh, but in flame and word. The priest had not entered the city physically. He had entered through meaning. Back at Kuru Command, the event was marked as the Vatican anomaly. It was classified under high quarantine. But even the files themselves began to fail. Every time they tried to record the encounter, audio logs turned into chants. Images blurred into stained glass mosaics. Data became parable. That night, across half the Earth's occupied zones, lights flickered. Bells rang simultaneously across thousands of abandoned churches. Mosques glowed faintly. Temples trembled. Not by design. Not by sabotage. But as if they remembered something. As if they were waking up. The Kuru tried to respond with logic, escalation, and brute force. But they were no longer fighting armies. They were fighting belief made real, sharpened into purpose, embodied in one man whose presence turned physics into poetry and war into ritual. And that man was moving east. Toward the citadel. Toward the throne of warlords who once mocked Earth's faith. One by one, their strongholds had started going silent. Now, only the largest remained. Their last hope was in the coldness of strategy, the emptiness of disbelief. But the war priest did not come to argue. He came to remind them that even stars can kneel. The jungles of Southeast Asia had once been lush with life, but now they groaned under the weight of Kuru machinery. Giant harvest crawlers drained the soil, turning sacred forests into blackened husks. Temples carved into stone cliffs had been reduced to rubble and overgrown with metal roots from alien terraformers. Every few miles, a spire drilled deep into the earth, siphoning resources and broadcasting the Kuru anthem across the sky. The people had either fled or died. The resistance had stopped sending teams into the region years ago, declaring it a graveyard. But the war priest walked in alone, carrying only a book and a staff made from the spine of a long-dead prophet. Drones spotted him moving through the brush, unarmed, slow, and deliberate. The footage confused Kuru commanders. They reran facial scans, thermal data, and spiritual interference metrics. All confirmed the same: it was him. And yet nothing made sense. No support, no weapons, no armor. Just a man. So they activated Protocol Blackham, dispatching a detachment of enforcers with cloaked snipers and spectral hounds. They wanted him captured alive, or at least dissected. But within 12 minutes of deployment, all communication ceased. When a recon orb was sent to survey the area, it returned a single image before crashing. The image showed 30 Kuru soldiers kneeling in the mud, eyes wide, mouths open in horror, with tree roots wrapped gently around their limbs like vines cradling a child. By the time news of this spread, resistance cells in the region began reactivating. Something in the earth had shifted. Birds returned. Rain fell cleaner. Locals whispered about dreams where a man in ash robes lit candles that bled gold. A woman in a ruined village told her children to draw protective runes again, saying the jungle had started humming prayers at night. A radio station, long thought destroyed, began broadcasting Gregorian chants spliced with old Buddhist mantras. No one admitted to transmitting them. In a crater near an old temple, Father Isf sat cross-legged among bones. He had not spoken in hours. Around him stood 10 young resistance fighters, unsure whether they were guarding him or being tested. One finally asked if the stories were true, if he had once silenced a star just by reciting a psalm. Isf looked up, and his eyes were full of both exhaustion and joy. He said he did not silence the star. He reminded it who it was. Then he gestured to the bones and asked them all to pray, not for victory, but for understanding. Not all of the fighters knew how. One recited a joke instead, half in fear. Isf smiled and said that would do just fine. The next morning, they found the alien extractor in the valley overturned and frozen in mid-function, vines growing from its steel belly. Kuru leadership met in orbit above Saturn's rings, seeking logic where none remained. They had come from a civilization that had erased gods millennia ago. They considered religion a psychological virus, eradicated through genetic refinement and collective memory reconditioning. Yet here they were, losing to a man who never fired a weapon and whose presence turned their warriors into mystics or corpses. One High Inquisitor demanded they begin building replicas of Earth's temples to study their power. Another suggested capturing human believers and surgically extracting the so-called belief centers of their brains. But no one could explain why their most advanced psionic agents now wept uncontrollably when exposed to simple hymns, or why holographic simulations of prayer rooms destabilized when rendered in full. Back on Earth, in a ruined colonial outpost along the coast, a band of mercenaries hired by the kuru waited in ambush. They had been promised double rewards for the priest's body, or any artifact he carried. Hardened men and women, enhanced with synthetic nerves and greed, they watched the jungle for movement. What they didn't notice was the wind stopping. The birds fell silent. And then came the laughter. Not loud, not manic, but quiet, distant, and full of sorrow. It echoed through the canopy like the voice of a disappointed father. By the time the first mercenary stood to investigate, the others were already pointing guns at each other. Something had been awakened within them. Guilt. Memories. Regret. One began confessing childhood sins. Another dropped her rifle and wept for a brother she betrayed. And then they saw him standing at the tree line, not with anger, but with mourning in his eyes. They never fired a shot. They left their weapons on the ground and walked into the jungle, never to be seen again. A captured kuru commander, interrogated days later, described seeing ISF in a dream. He said the priest had entered his mind, not with violence, but with stories. Stories of love, loss, betrayal, and hope. The kind of stories no kuru child had heard for generations. The commander begged to be baptized, even though he didn't know what that meant. He simply said he wanted to feel something real again. He was found dead 2 hours later, smiling, with a tear still frozen on his cheek. No marks. No poison. Just release. Then came the broadcast. No one claimed to send it. It appeared on every kuru channel, on every screen, even those without power. It showed the war priest standing beneath an ancient tree, speaking in a dozen languages at once. His words were soft. They told of Earth's oldest wounds. Of temples built not to dominate, but to shelter. Of prayers not meant to summon vengeance, but to remind the soul of its shape. As he spoke, the background changed. From jungles to deserts, oceans to cities, each location marked by some form of resistance where no soldiers remained. Only people. Alive. Changed. Watching. The broadcast ended with ISF placing his hand on his heart and saying one phrase, "Even darkness remembers light." The effect was immediate. Kuru's ships began malfunctioning, not mechanically, but existentially. Navigation systems recalculated routes to ancient religious centers. Artificial intelligences developed errors when calculating odds against humans. One ship AI suffered a complete emotional collapse, demanding to be renamed. Some kuru soldiers threw down their weapons and began carving symbols into the dirt. Their commanders called it madness. But it was awakening. In the depths of a submerged monastery off the coast of India, ISF knelt before a shattered mural. He reached into the water and pulled out an object long thought lost, the breath of Ashra, a relic said to harmonize time with intention. As he held it, the water glowed faintly, and the sky above the ocean shifted slightly, like a page turning in the wind. He did not smile. He simply whispered a prayer that had not been uttered since the stars were young. And somewhere deep in the kuru citadel, alarms began to ring. Not from intrusion. Not from weapons. But from silence. A silence that spread floor by floor. Room by room. As if the stronghold itself was forgetting what it was. And something older, something buried beneath all that arrogance and steel, was starting to remember. Ask ChatGPT. The Citadel Exodus had never known fear. It was built in defiance of the concept itself, a massive fortress anchored into the crust of a dead moon orbiting the shattered remains of a planet the Kuru had destroyed long ago just to prove they could. It floated like a black crown over a graveyard, its walls forged from neutron-tempered alloy and its halls lined with relics of conquest. Within its chambers lived the 7 warlords, the highest echelon of Kuru command, being so elevated they had not touched ground in decades. They ruled through thought, decree, and terror. And now, for the first time in their reign, the lights flickered. The anomaly began in the eastern quarter, sector virile. A maintenance drone failed to report back. Then 3. Then every camera watching that section stopped transmitting. The standard response was to purge the area with neural gas and dispatch a purge team. But when the team arrived, they found something no protocol had prepared them for. The walls were clean. Sterile. Too clean. Every surface had been scrubbed of kuru insignia. Every corridor was lined with candles. Wax that should not exist burned with a cold blue flame. In the center of the command room, the kuru banners had been lowered and folded neatly. On the floor, a phrase had been burned into the alloy, etched by some force that had never touched metal: "He is already inside." Panic took shape slowly among the warlords. They had crushed empires, erased cultures, eradicated gods from dozens of worlds. They refused to believe one man could enter the most secure installation in the known galaxy without a fleet, without a weapon. But they also could not deny the reports. Guards stationed outside their own throne rooms had started praying. The type of prayer that did not belong to any earth tongue or known faith, but carried cadence and reverence regardless. When questioned, the guards could not recall the words they had spoken. One even vomited ink. Another plucked out his own eyes and said he could see clearly now. Warlord Sevis, the most aggressive of the 7, demanded immediate withdrawal of all alien personnel to the upper levels. He ordered the internal sanctums to be locked. But his commands came too late. By the time security enacted the lockdown, 3 more sectors had gone dark. The power grid began fluctuating. Screens began displaying verses in languages no AI could translate. And worst of all, the central comm array picked up a signal, weak at first, then overwhelming. It was a heartbeat. Slow. Measured. Human. The warlords argued among themselves for the first time in 100 years. Exhortak, the most ancient and logical of them, insisted the priest was a myth, a psychological virus infecting the lower ranks. He advocated for cognitive purging of every soldier exposed to the phenomenon. In contrast, Warlord Heller suggested summoning the psychic clergy of the kuru, beings stripped of identity and programmed to interpret anomaly patterns. But when the clergy arrived, they collapsed in the corridor outside the council chamber, screaming, their voices speaking in harmony with a hymn not written by their kind. And then came the parchment. It arrived pinned to the door of the central vault, a place no one should have been able to reach. Made of no identifiable material, soaked in what was unmistakably alien blood, the message was short: "I will come for you last. Repent." Sevis tried to flee that night. He boarded his personal dreadnought, the Infernal Rite, and launched from the Citadel's upper hangar with a full escort. The ship cleared orbit. Then it vanished from all kuru scans. For an hour there was silence. Then came a transmission from the dreadnought itself, automated and looping. It displayed no coordinates, no timestamp. Just a single image. The ship's bridge, untouched by flame or weapon, frozen in time. Sevis knelt in the center, naked, eyes open, hands together in silent prayer. Around him stood figures robed in ash and light. Then the feed ended. The ship's wreckage was found drifting at the edge of a star it should not have reached. Panic became infection. The Citadel's systems turned against themselves. Internal navigation began leading patrols in circles. Weapon turrets retracted or refused to fire. Life support adjusted oxygen levels to match Earth monasteries. The kuru elite who once scoffed at rituals now found themselves clutching old tokens, trinkets stolen from conquered temples, whispering apologies to no one. A sense of presence settled into the Citadel, like fog. And no one could identify its source. Then the silence came. One by one, the warlords stopped receiving messages from their personal guard. Entire squadrons simply ceased to exist. No screams. No alarms. Just absence. The AI that ran the Citadel's core began writing verses in its own code. It altered its voice modulation to match ancient human liturgy. Exhortak attempted a hard reset of the system. His hand burned as soon as it touched the command node. No fire. Just pain. And then a vision. He never spoke of it. He simply walked back to his throne and wept. In the following hours, strange phenomena spread. Statues of alien victory crumbled. Walls bled water. Air vents exhaled incense. A choir could be heard humming across all frequencies, sometimes off tune, sometimes perfect, but always distant. The warlords were no longer commanders. They were pilgrims trapped in a fortress that had become its own cathedral, reconfiguring itself with every passing moment. One by one, the outer layers of the citadel collapsed, not from attack, but from refusal. The metal refused to obey physics. Doors refused to open. Lights refused to shine. And deep below, beneath the council chamber, a chamber long sealed began to glow. No kuru had ever opened it. They had ignored it, written it off as an anomaly. But now it pulsed like a heart. The AI refused to approach it. Drones sent to scan it disintegrated midair. But cameras caught one image before static overtook them. A man in ash robes, walking down the corridor. Exhortak gathered the remaining 4 warlords, the others already lost to disappearance or madness. They had once considered themselves immortal, enlightened, chosen by logic and strength. Now they stood surrounded by symbols they had once destroyed. Bibles. Qurans. Torah scrolls. Vedas. Carvings of unnamed gods and unnamed faces. Not one had been placed by hand. They had grown from the walls like roots remembering sunlight. The council chamber's dome cracked. The stars above, visible through reinforced glass, shifted. And then a voice filled the chamber. Not from speakers. Not from their minds. From within. It asked them one question. Do you believe now? Exhortak stood alone. The others had fallen. Not slain. Not destroyed. But undone. Their forms crumbled like statues made of sand. He remained only because he answered. I do not know what I believe. The voice replied. That is enough. And then the doors opened. Not by force. Not by command. But by invitation. And the war priest entered the heart of the stronghold. Beneath the citadel's cracked dome, the air had changed. It was no longer stale, or recycled through ancient filtration systems. It smelled of earth after rain, of old parchment, of incense burned during long-forgotten ceremonies. The floor trembled, not with violence but reverence. Father Iosef walked forward, steps echoing louder than they should, the folds of his ash-gray robes brushing over metal that now glowed with faint traces of forgotten prayers. The chamber before him had once been the warlord's sanctum, a place of arrogance and absolute dominion. Now it stood stripped of its thrones, its walls weeping light, and at its center knelt the last of the 7. Exhortak did not raise his head. His armor, once glistening with reflective obsidian plating and lined with command nodes, had dulled, peeling away like molted skin. His breathing was uneven, strained by the pressure of something far older than gravity. Iosef paused just before the dais, his voice quiet and without malice, asking the same question he had asked 1,000 others. Do you remember who you were before the Empire? The alien warrior's lips parted slowly. He spoke not in his language, nor in any known on Earth, but in something between sound and sensation. He described a memory of standing in a field under violet skies before the war, before the conquest, holding the hand of someone who taught him stories not meant for battle. And for the first time in centuries, Exhortak wept. Far below, the citadel's core awakened. Its primary reactor, once powered by neutron decay, began pulsing with harmonic frequencies. Systems that had never been accessed lit up. Walls shifted, not crumbling but reshaping into forms that resembled ancient cathedrals, temples, stone circles, and spirals of stars. The very architecture began to remember Earth's mythologies, not by design, but by resonance. Cameras scattered across the station showed corridors blooming with light. Crew quarters, once sterile, now hummed with whispered verses. Soldiers who had not yet fallen to madness simply fell to their knees, overcome with visions of peace they had never experienced. Outside the citadel, Koru's ships observed in confusion and fear. No weapons were firing. No alarms blared. But the citadel itself had changed hue, its once black surface now shimmering with bronze and deep crimson, as if it were being rewritten molecule by molecule. They attempted to establish communication. The signal that returned was not a message but a sound, a simple bell tolling in slow, steady rhythm, too human to be a coincidence. In orbit, remnants of the Kuru fleet debated whether to fire upon their own stronghold. Some claimed the citadel had been infected by a cognitive virus. Others believed it had become a conduit for an ancient power the humans had long suppressed. A few, more desperate, declared the entire region of space cursed and began fleeing without orders. When a commander attempted to detonate a singularity warhead as a last resort, the launch system refused activation. Not due to malfunction, but because the ship's AI had locked them out. It spoke only one phrase: "He is not done." Back inside, Father ISF reached down and lifted Exortac gently to his feet. There was no battle, no judgment. Only silence, thick and sacred. Then came the sound of footsteps behind them. 10 figures stepped into the chamber, each wearing variations of robes from different faiths. Some carried weapons that glowed faintly with runes. Others held relics long believed lost. They were the Revenants, the forgotten products of Earth's last theological defense program. Soldiers infused with encoded scripture, memory-locked conviction, and sacramental technology. Once declared heretical and buried in stasis vaults across the planet, they had awoken one by one as the priest moved closer to the citadel. Each had heard the call not through alarms, but through dreams. The Revenants formed a circle around ISF and Exortac. One of them, a woman with a voice like wind over glass, began to chant. Another pulled forth a scroll forged from folded light and unrolled it over the floor. The chamber responded. Light rose from the center, taking the shape of a spiral galaxy, rotating slowly, etched with symbols and paths that mapped every moment of conquest the Kuru had ever committed. Each point of light shimmered, then dimmed, and then reignited in a new color, not erasing history, but transforming it. Forgiveness rewritten as foundation. Wrath re-anchored as remembrance. Exortac stared at the map, breathing slowly. His eyes reflected the entire spiral. He turned to ISF, asking the question none of the warlords had dared to ask until now. Why me? The priest answered simply. Because you remained. Because someone had to bear witness. Because even stone remembers warmth if touched long enough. In that moment, the citadel began to collapse, not from failure, but from fulfillment. The structure no longer needed to exist. Its purpose had been rewritten. Instead of falling apart, it folded inward, its mass compacting gently, releasing waves of peace that traveled faster than light. Across the galaxy, Kuru outposts experienced moments of stillness. Soldiers dropped their arms, looked around, and felt for the first time the weight of their deeds. Some screamed. Some sang. Others simply sat, staring at nothing, remembering what they had once chosen to forget. On Earth, children who had never spoken began reciting verses from forgotten traditions. A blind man in Istanbul wept as he saw stars through closed eyelids. In the ruins of a prison in the Congo, a wall cracked open to reveal a mural painted by no human hand, showing a man in ash robes walking beside figures from every culture, their shadows merging into one. In the final moment of the citadel's transformation, ISF turned his gaze upward. The ceiling of the chamber opened, revealing the vastness of space. One by one, the Revenants raised their hands. A pulse of light burst from the center of the sanctum, not destructive, but expansive. It carried meaning, not force. And that meaning reached the stars. One ship among the fleeing Kuru caught the signal directly. Its crew had already abandoned their posts, cowering in fear. But when the light passed through them, they stood. Not with weapons, not with orders, but with memory. They looked at one another and knew their war was over. Not because they had lost, but because there was nothing left to win. In the silence that followed, the priest stepped toward the altar formed from the citadel's heart. He placed his staff upon it, and it dissolved into light. Exortac looked at him once more and nodded. Then, without a word, the war priest vanished, not walked, not faded. Simply ceased to be. In the void that remained, only a whisper echoed. Let the galaxy remember. And the galaxy did. The silence that followed the collapse of Citadel Exodus was not empty. It was sacred. It spread through the kuru network faster than any fleet ever had, infecting command protocols, muting long-range broadcasts, and turning encrypted frequencies into soft, rhythmic chanting. No orders went out. No updates came in. The strongest fortress the galaxy had ever known had not fallen to weapons or strategy, but had simply ceased to respond. Intelligence units scrambled for answers, but all they found were fragments, glimpses of glowing symbols etched into the walls, untranslatable transmissions pulsing with harmonic resonance, and visual logs of high-ranking warlords either kneeling or weeping or simply gone. The humans had not launched an attack. No fleet had arrived. The stars had not shifted. And yet the entire sector felt altered, as if space itself now moved to a slower rhythm, one that could not be tracked or predicted. A few kuru captains tried to report the anomaly as a technological failure. But then their crews began speaking differently. Not just using new words, but choosing silence. One soldier was found meditating over an open fuel conduit, eyes closed, whispering thanks to something he could not name. Others refused to arm themselves, claiming they had already been forgiven. On Earth, the changes began subtly. The skies grew clearer. Radiation storms dissipated. Fields long thought poisoned bloomed with wild grass. Deep in bunkers and ruined cities, resistance leaders waited for retaliation. None came. Satellites showed Kuru's ships in retreat, not tactical withdrawal but full abandonment. Empty vessels drifted, their control rooms sealed, their crews vanished or meditative beyond communication. In the heart of what used to be Berlin, a child born blind opened his eyes and cried not in fear but in awe, claiming to see a tower of light reaching the sky, even though no one else could. World leaders and former generals gathered to decide what came next. Some argued the war was over and must now be buried with ceremony. Others believed this was a temporary reprieve, a lull before the kuru rebuilt and returned. But none of their words matched the reality spreading across the planet. Ancient temples reassembled stone by stone without human touch. Scrolls long thought lost appeared in riverbeds and burned out archives. And in every city, someone began to dream of a man in ash robes who said nothing, yet made them weep with understanding. A new council was formed, the spiritual concord of Earth, a loose alliance of scholars, scientists, theologians, and even skeptics, united by one purpose: to understand what had happened without repeating the mistakes that led to it. They summoned those who had followed Father Iosef, hoping to find clarity. But none of the revenants responded. It was as if they had returned to the silence that created them. Only one fragment surfaced. A piece of cloth embroidered with a single phrase: "It is not belief that changes the stars, but what we do because we believe." Among the Concord was a woman named Rena Tal, once a field medic, now a historian of the impossible. She gathered testimonies from those touched by the war priest's passage. A farmer who watched his irrigation system repair itself after praying for the first time in decades. A former kuru engineer who now carved wooden tablets depicting Earth's religious symbols, even though he still claimed to follow none of them. A soldier who heard Iosef's voice every time he tried to pick up a weapon. All of them spoke with a calmness that could not be faked, as if something fundamental inside them had changed. The Concord debated what to do with the knowledge left behind. Books written in unearthly script. Devices that reacted to human thought but refused to function under pressure. Monuments that appeared overnight, each etched with stories no living person remembered. The question was whether to study these things as tools or to leave them as relics. Some wanted to unlock their secrets for power. Others feared that doing so would awaken something far worse than the war they had just survived. Then, without warning, the sky spoke. Not a sound. Not an attack. But across every device on every frequency, in every language, a message appeared. It bore no origin code. No source. Just a single image, a throne of stone and roots empty. And beneath it, written in the universal tongue of the kuru, "He is not gone. He is waiting." The Concord met again, shaken by the transmission. It was interpreted in many ways. A warning. A promise. A challenge. a truth. No one could agree on what it meant, but all agreed it changed everything. For the first time in centuries, Earth was not reacting to the galaxy but shaping it. They were no longer the hunted. They had become something else entirely. Not conquerors, not rulers, but reminders. A mirror to the stars. Across the galaxy, new factions emerged. Former Kuru soldiers founded enclaves built on reflection and ritual, drawing symbols in dirt and honoring silence before action. Colonies once ruled by alien fear erected shrines, not to any one god, but to memory itself. Statues of the war priest appeared without sculptors. His face, always different, yet always the same. A calm gaze. A quiet mouth. Eyes that held galaxies. And in a distant system, where no human had yet walked, a civilization preparing for expansion gathered its high council to discuss Earth. Their leader dismissed the tales of mystics and priests, calling them myths for a primitive species. But that night, alone in his chamber, he found a piece of parchment on his desk. The material was unknown. The text untranslatable. But he understood it. I am already among you. He called off the invasion before dawn. Earth rebuilt slowly. Not just cities and machines, but something deeper. Families no longer told bedtime stories of soldiers or explosions, but of silence that made tyrants kneel. New generations grew up surrounded by strange relics that responded only to kindness and reverence. Some learned to activate them. Others simply sat near them, feeling peace. There were no instructions. Only memory. And somewhere, in a mountain monastery never marked on any map, a single candle remained lit. Its flame never flickered. No wind could touch it. No hand had lit it. And above it, carved into the stone by something older than tools, were the final words the war priest had spoken before he vanished from the citadel. Even stars can kneel. And because they had, everything had changed.